my identity became I have high grades.
Yeah, like it needs to be a 9 or above. You could have done better because you're not getting the grade that you should be getting.
I'm gonna fail out. I'm not gonna get an internship. I'm not like, I was like spiraling.
My friends were like, there's something wrong.
It's time to get loud. Welcome back to LoudTalk with Lavi, a podcast where we break down the walls of beauty standards one flaw at a time. And today I have one of my best friends, a very special guest. Please welcome Nicole. Thank you so much for coming.
Hi.
On LoudTalk. I'm super excited. We're doing more in-person guests this season, and I was really excited to have you on and
Thank you.
I feel like we have a podcast episode, like just us two anyways, literally
every time we hang out.
So I'm like, let's just press record and I can use it as
no, I get what you mean, yeah.
But one thing so in this episode, we're going to be talking a lot about like academics, academic validation, how your identity can kind of like fluctuate with that. Because I think we've both been, really like school our whole lives.
Yeah.
So I'll give like a bit of background like on myself. I've talked about this on here before, but throughout high school, I was very like school all
oriented,
the time.
Yeah.
Like, especially in, like, I mean, growing up always, but high school for sure, especially because like marks were like more attributed rather than like a number grade.
Yeah.
I don't know how it was for you in junior high, but for us it was just like from 1 to 5, like numbers, and then high school is when we got percentages. Was it the same for you?
No, we had percentages junior high and high school, like because I went to a private school for junior high and high school, and so that's kind of when I felt a big academic shift, like in junior or in elementary school. From what my parents say, I was always very like chatty, did not care about school at all. But I think it was honestly just like lack of motivation. I didn't feel any like motivation to try hard because like it wasn't particularly like hard to do well. And then when I went to like this new school that was more focused on academics and was like definitely more challenging, that's when kind of my perspective shifted. So yeah, and that's when grades, like it was percentages in junior high as well.
Yeah, like I think I remember in junior high specifically, like one of the comments from one of my teachers on, I don't remember if it was on my report card or like at the parent teacher interviews, but they were like, Lavinia does not shut up, like she's always talking.
Hey, I struggled with that so much as a kid, and like I'm sure that you probably had that, where it's like it's so weird because in like elementary school and junior high, especially if you're really, really chatty, then it would be painted as negative.
Yeah.
But then if you're really, really quiet, it's also like painted as negative. Yeah. And so then you don't know like what to do with your life, especially at such a young age, like 10, 11, 12. You're like, so is it good to talk? Is it not good to talk? And then as you get older, you find out that actually being extroverted is a very good quality.
Skill, yeah.
But then for so long, like I remember, so a lot of my best friends when I was younger were really, really shy. And kind of like, I always was, in class, I got told like all the time, like, oh, I always chatted a bunch. And then like family friends would always be like, oh, Nicole's like so outgoing and like so chatty. But sometimes it felt like it was a negative.
Yeah.
And so then I would like feel bad for being outgoing. And because my friends were like so quiet and like it didn't really seem like people talked about that negatively, I like tried to be also quiet in school. Tried is the key word there.
Yeah, for me it was always like Lavinia always like gets her work done. The issue is like
she'll chat and distract other people.
That was always like she's distracting other people. Because I was a really fast worker, so I'd like always get my shit done, and then I'd turn to the person beside me and I'm like, oh, talk their ear off.
That happened to me in elementary school a lot.
Yeah, and it was always looked at negative to me. Like I specifically remember grade 9 specifically, I got like that comment. But then in high school, like that was never looked at
as much as
negative,
an issue,
especially in university. Like
not
completely a positive.
Yeah, like being able to talk in class and like and answer questions, like interact with your prof is such a important quality to have.
Yeah.
Or I mean, just in general, it's like quite an important quality to be able to like ask questions and all those things. And you definitely, I don't think, understand that until you're older.
Totally.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of like the grades, like I mean, I was like obsessed with school ever since I was like little.
Yeah.
I mean, my mom. So I really wanted to become a teacher when I was older. Like that was my, especially when I was in elementary. I would come home from school and I would set up, like, my room was like my classroom, and I would
Yeah.
put all my stuffed animals, and then I'd sit my brother down. My brother. I'd sit him down. He's probably editing this, like, my life. Like,
Yeah.
these were the worst days of my childhood. I'd sit him down after school. So imagine this poor kid going to, like, school all day,
All
right?
day.
And he wasn't like, he didn't like school the way I liked school. And I'd sit him down after a full day of school, and not only sit him down, but teach him what I learned. So not only did he have the full day at school, but then I'd put him down, teach him like the 2 grade levels
Yeah.
or 3 grade levels above.
Above.
And he'd be like, you know, so confused. But I was so obsessed with that. I was like really in, like, you know, I was sending my mom emails. Like, I just loved the whole, you know, like,
Yeah.
I wanted to, like, adult so
Mhm.
badly, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna be a teacher. When I finished grade 4, which is when my elementary was K to 4,
Mhm.
and when I left, like, my mom literally had to, like, pull me from the walls. Like, I was crying.
Oh, like, you've always really
Like,
liked
I
school.
was, like, not wanting to leave. My mom would have to book my, like, doctor and dentist appointments at, like, 6 AM because I refused to miss school. Like,
And this is, like, ever since you were little.
ever since I was little.
Interesting.
Yeah. Like, I've always just been so obsessed with school, and I think, like, obviously, like, it wavered over the years, but
Mhm.
also very, like, overachiever type energy. Cause my mom was always like, fuck, like, all these projects she's getting, they're so elaborate. She's like, I'm so scared for when Nick, my younger brother, is gonna go through these grades, because if he has all these projects, like, you know, and then he would go through the grades, and then she realized, no, Lavinia would give herself all these projects. Like, the project would be like, create, like, for example, create a 5-minute presentation, and I'd be like, okay, I'm creating a 30-minute presentation plus, like,
Yeah.
visual plus handouts for everyone, plus, like, I was
You were
always,
going
you know,
above and
but I'd
beyond.
come home and be like, hey mom, this is what I have to do for my presentation,
Because you liked
you
it.
know, and
Yeah.
I'd set up these criteria. So yeah, I was, like, just crazy and obsessed with it from that point. And I think once it got to high school, where it was less like project based and more just like tests and grades, it was always, I think getting good grades was always ingrained in me from a young age.
Yeah.
And I don't know if, like, you can speak on your experience to this as well, but, like, I think for my parents, it was always like, okay, like, we moved to Canada, like, you guys have a different opportunity to, like, get these good grades, get into a good school, and get a good job. Like, that was always,
That
like,
was the trajectory.
what you need
Yeah.
to do. So in my head is like, I need to get good grades. Like, that was just so, like, baseline for me. Like, that's just the expectation.
Yeah, that's the expectation. Yeah.
And it wasn't that my parents were like, if I got a bad grade, it was like the end of the world. My mom was always like, as long as you tried, like, if you put 100% of your efforts, your studying, everything, and you got like a lower grade, like, you know, what can you do to improve for the next
Yeah.
one? Or like, you got a 95 instead of 100, like, where did you go wrong? How could you do better, right?
Yeah.
So it was that kind of, I don't want to say pressure, because I was also self-driven in that, but like, I think growing up like in an immigrant family, being like the first generation here, I did feel like that driving pressure to, like, do really well in
No,
school.
I totally understand that. Like, I think, and I don't think that in any means, like, and maybe this is also like older daughter syndrome slash like only child syndrome, because like you're the oldest and I'm an only child. So I feel like your parents are always like, we moved, I'm also an immigrant, by the way. If I think that adds context. Our parents are always like, oh, we moved here to give you a better life. And like, I want to give you as best opportunities as possible. And like, especially because like you know that you're kind of like, I don't want to like disappoint it's not always like, obviously parents put sometimes pressure on their children. I never, like, I felt pressure, but it wasn't like this like crumbling pressure. It was more just like, I don't want to disappoint them because I know they've worked so hard. Like, why would then I go around and like do, like, not put my best work effort when they've like given up so many things to be here in the first place. But for me, like, I did not have that similar experience of like, I really liked school when I was younger. I liked school for the social aspect, but like, I like could get my work done. I'd do it quickly. Like, I enjoyed learning things, but I was kind of just like, this is just a thing you do. But I did like dressing up my Build-A-Bear every day. So it's like, I'm like, I'm wearing this to school. My Build-A-Bear will wear this to school and like put on the little backpack.
Yeah.
But I wasn't like, I love all these projects. I was just like, oh, this is something I have to, I do.
Part of it, yeah.
I enjoyed learning new things. I remember enjoying to learn new things, but I never was like, I'm so excited to go back to school. I think I like the social aspect. Then we moved here and I didn't like the social aspect of school for a while. I had kind of a hard time making friends when I first moved here from what I remember. And then I like made good friends and I like liked the social aspect of school again. it wasn't until, to be completely honest, my excitement for school to start kind of started around like grade 5, grade 6, when I started watching YouTube and like back to school YouTube videos. Because the thing I always loved, liked getting my back to school stuff, but that kind of like grew that excitement for school. And then, as I said, I went to a private school. So like when I started that application process because when you go to a private school in junior high here, you have to like take a test and apply. So then I started like prepping for the test. If I was going to go to the school in grade 7, I started applying for this test in like the summer, studying for this test in the summer of grade 6. And so then is kind of when my parents were like, and I didn't go to a private school for any specific reason other than in my community there were like not a lot of public schools. So and my parents didn't want to put me in a school that was really far away, also because like you don't fall in the district and stuff. And so I like started applying for this, and that's kind of when I was like, okay, like I need to put my head in the game, because like going to a school that's far away though, and like both your parents work and stuff is not really an option. And so like I went through this whole application process and like worked my butt off, because I always did well in school, but it was never because I was like trying particularly hard. Always suffered in English though, but that's it. That doesn't count. No, I'm just kidding. English is important. English is important.
That was
English class is important
too. Like math, science, it just clicked.
Clicked, like
with English, I'm like, damn, reading comprehension test.
The reading
and okay, I did not learn how to properly take a reading comprehension test till grade 12.
Because you had to take a reading comp test?
No, because this was the first teacher I had that told me you need to read the questions before.
You had never heard that before?
Every teacher before that, I'm telling you, Nicole, like grade 5 to grade 11, told me read the sources first, then read the questions. But
then you're like reading, look for everything rather than just looking for what you're asked.
And let me tell you, like, I think I went from like, I don't even remember what the grade increase was, but like I literally in grade 12 I started doing like amazing in English because I was like, oh, this is a lot more
how to do a reading.
And you know, and more black and white than I was at like thinking it before, because that's how I was taught it. Up until grade 12. And the reason too is because I just told my teacher, I'm like, I find I struggle with reading comprehension, and every teacher would just tell me, oh, it just depends how much you read it as a kid. And I'm like, well,
no, that's not true at all.
Also, like, you know, we can't go back in time now. I didn't read shit as a kid. I wasn't a big reader like, ever, so it's like, but how could I fix that now? And this one teacher was like, okay, so if it's not working for you, like, because typically we say read the source, he's like, how about you just try reading the questions first? And I did like amazing on the test. And I was like, oh, so I've been scammed my whole English career in school.
Well, I mean, we can talk about this later, but like the older I get, also the more I realize that, like, I mean, I personally think that testing is sometimes is important to like ensure that like things are getting taught to a level to like assess education as a whole, but like objectively also testing is not particularly the best way to show your knowledge, especially as you're older. Like, it's one test representing a year of learning. Like, if you're even have like a cold, you're just not going to think as well. And so much testing is strategy. Do you know which questions that you need to skip because you like it's going to take too much time, especially like those like standardized tests is so much strategy rather than like, can you do it?
And that's the thing is, like, I used to put so much, like, for me, it's crazy now I have such a different perspective on this, and it's just like, but me in high school, I put so much value on those tests, and not just like, I became really good at test writing. Like, the strategic part of it, like, I knew how to write a test, like, fully to get a good mark.
Me too,
But it's crazy that I would really, like, maybe even, like, borderline judgmental of, like,
people who did bad.
I was like, the only way you could be, like, smart is, like,
if you do well on a test.
Like, if you don't have high, you know, like, I really was judgmental in that. And now looking back, like, I have a completely 180 different perspective on it. But I really think, like, it just, like, took that time to, like, you know, go through. And I just think, like, growing up and, like, realizing and stuff. But I think in high school, like, so much, it got to the point in high school where my identity became, I have high grades. You know, like, and if I did get a bad grade, like, I remember what you just said, like, now, like, you could be sick. Like, there was a point in grade 12 where I mentioned this to you earlier today, but I got sick for like 2 months. And it got to the point where I couldn't read, like, the questions on a test. And I got like a 50% on a calc test, which is like my teacher
At
put
that
me aside.
time,
Yeah.
you would be like, that's crazy.
I was sitting at a 99 in the class, so the teacher was like, cap it, you know? And I'm like, I could not read the questions. That's when I was like, something's wrong. But just to put in perspective of like, that was like standard for me. And it wasn't like I studied, like not to, but it just clicked for me. Like math and science just clicked for me. I put in the work for sure. I'm not one of those people that can just say like, yeah, it just showed up in class and like I did great. No, like I put in the work, but so much of my identity in high school revolved around like school. And yes, I was doing like I was making content back then, like I was in cause and stuff, but a lot of my identity revolved around the grades. And I think even when applying to university, I knew I didn't want to go into like health care or anything like medical. I didn't really know what engineering was, which to preface, like we both did an engineering degree, so we'll get into that. But I didn't know what engineering was, and then I was like, okay, I guess I'll probably just go into business. But I felt like I was like kind of like wasting my grades.
Interesting. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I definitely think I had a different experience. So after like I got into the school, my parents kind of, and at this time, I also like danced all throughout my childhood and growing up. And at this point in my life, I had like started competing. And my parents were kind of like, okay, you got into the school. So like I got into the school and they kind of were like, okay, she did really well in the math portion of this test, like the acceptance test, but she didn't do very well in the English portion. So like clearly she's smart, but like, and she can like do these things, but we'll give her like a chance. And so I like went in for like a day to like kind of like so the school would see like how well I did and stuff. And they essentially had like a trial day and they were also kind of worried on my age because I am like a year younger than everybody. And that school had a lot of like American students would come at the time at that time. And if you don't know, usually when kids transfer schools from the US to Canada, they usually like get held back a year. So they're typically older than your average Canadian student. And so they were really worried. They were like, she's already a year younger than most of our students, and she'll be like 2 years younger. So how is like she gonna adapt socially as well to that change of environment? Went to trial day. Trial day went, and they accepted me into the school. And my parents kind of were like pulled me aside, being like, these are the things like that you need to like keep in mind. Like the school is going to feel more challenging than the school that you're going to right now, which like makes sense. It's obviously going from a public school to a private school, and it's a school that focused a lot on academics. So they were like, this is going to be a challenge because you're coming from like a different background. A lot of these kids that are going to be in your classes have been at the school since like the dawn of time, and you're also younger than everybody else, so you're gonna have like it's gonna be a change, and you like have to work hard to like essentially catch up with these kids. You're gonna be at a disadvantage. And so I took that really seriously, and I think that challenge aspect is what really like pushed me to try hard, and that's when I started really caring about grades. And like the change was 180. Like I again in elementary school did well in math and stuff, but I didn't like necessarily feel the urge to try hard. I remember even one time like a dentist asked me, I was like, oh, like what's your favorite subject? And at this point I was in elementary school, and I was like, I don't like anything. Like I don't.
It's just there.
It's just there. Like I don't. And my mom was like, that's unacceptable. You need to like something, Nicole. You have to find one thing you like. You can't just not like anything. And then I went into junior high and I was like, okay, I like these classes and stuff, and that's when I started putting a lot of work in. That's kind of when I saw more like I guess return for good grades. Like not only was I like, oh, I'm proud that I did really well, but I was like, oh, this is challenging, I'm gonna try hard, and then I could see those efforts pay off. And yeah, I definitely tried hard in school objectively compared to how hard I needed to try in university. It's like not at all. And I could probably even look back and like except for like the end of high school when you're like applying to universities and taking different forms of classes, it was definitely that first 2 years at my school where I tried the hardest because I was like, I need to like catch up and like almost like prove myself that I can be here. And so then at that time, obviously with how important school was and the fact that dance would have taken competition would have taken so much time away from school, I stopped competing. Like I still danced, but I didn't compete. And that's when I placed a lot of effort into school. And I cannot deny, especially at the beginning when I started at that school, I felt a lot like of like kids felt really competition-y, if that makes sense. Like I vividly remember, I think it was grade 7 or like grade 8, and I was in a ballet class, and this girl like was continuously missing ballet. And so like the teacher one day, and she went to my school, and the teacher one day, or like it was like so out of pocket. It's so weird. I don't remember the story clearly, but I like the teacher one day asked her like, oh, like where have you been? And she's like, oh, like, I don't know, like, if you know, like, Nicole and I both go to the same school and it's like midterms, and I don't really know how much she prioritizes grades, but I really prioritize grades and I've been studying a lot. And I was just like, this is so out of pocket. Like, so at the beginning stages of being at that school, I felt a lot more competition. I think my mindset changed a bit more because I think I had this like mentality of like I need to prove that it's okay for me to be at the school. And that's when I started caring a lot about grades. And that whole idea of like I would get a good grade, I'd be like, oh, I like for me, especially during junior high and high school, it was like 90 or above, 90 or above. Like it needs to be a 90 or above. And it was never a point of where my parents were like, you need to get a 90 above. It was something that like I put my, like
it became that internal.
My parents definitely were like, you need to try as hard as you can. And like, if there's an area of weakness, like we need to figure out why there's an area of weakness and like put effort into that. But it was never like, they were never like, came up to me being like, if you don't get this grade, like you're in trouble or something.
Yeah.
I think it's just like that kind of, for some reason, is like the standard of what doing really well is. I feel like everyone had that standard here. And so then I was like 90 or above, 90 or above. And if I didn't get a 90 or above, it felt like the end of the world. Especially like less than like an 85. You'd be like
85 was like, you know, you'd be like, okay. But less than, and
the only class I was out here getting less than 85 was gym class.
Gym class?
Because at my school you would have to do the beep test. And your beep test grade wasn't like, oh, how much effort did you put in? It was like, how many laps did you do? And there'd be these like kids who are great at running. And that is genuinely like, and maybe this will be like the worst thing to say, but genuinely like brought my grades down in junior high when gym was mandatory was gym. Like that is what brought my average down. And then also on top of that, the school I went to would then do like their like scholar award at the end of the year. So if like the criteria was like you have an average of like, it's probably less, I don't know, let's say something, whatever, you'd have an average more than 90 and like could not do less than an 85 in any of your core subjects, then you'd get like whatever, this pin. And so I got it that first year. So then and then it's like, and it's like the standard is like you need to get it every year. You know what I mean?
It's like,
and it was also like they would announce every single kid in the grade who'd get it. And like at my school, it would be like over 80% of the kids would get it. And so it's like kind of like you'd be like, oh, like this kid didn't get it. That's like embarrassing. You know what I mean?
So I'm curious because like for me, I think my school was like, I remember in high school, I was like in math AP and it felt like, and I will like fully own up to this, I do feel like I did judge people who like weren't in, not that I, like, this is hard to say because like, obviously I wasn't in AP for all my classes, you know?
Yeah.
But it was like, I knew people who were really, really good at math the same way I was and chose not to be an AP. And I was like, why? You know, like, I didn't really understand that fully. And I do think there was the competition of like, you know, a test mark would come out and be like, what did everyone get? Like this and this and this, you know, and like comparing answers and stuff. I didn't take that like too competitively, but I'm curious, like, I think a lot of the people I went to school with, like getting a 70 on a test was like, amazing, like you know, like this is like good. So I'm curious, like going to a private school, like, and having everyone kind of be like in that same mindset of like 90 or above.
Like at my school, like it wasn't a question you were going to university. Like the school has this like saying of like 99% university whatever acceptance grade, because there's always like that one kid who didn't go to university directly straight after they graduated high school. But it wasn't like at my school, it wasn't like, are you gonna go to the university? It's like, which university are you going to? It was never a are you.
Right. I see. Interesting. Yeah. And I think like for me it was always like I'm going to university. I literally remember the amount of phone calls like my grandma would call me. She'd be like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm studying. She's like, good, like, you know, get good grades, like go to university, get a good job. That was always like the mindset, like always. And I think like grade 10 is when I really started, because as I mentioned, like in junior high, our grades were 1 to 4. So like it's like, okay, if you got all 4s, like that was between 80 and 100. So it was never like you never really knew where you were sitting. But when high school, when we first started getting percentages, in grade 10 when I was seeing I was getting like in the 90s, then for grade 11 it's like, okay, now can I get like close to 95? In grade 12 can I get closer to 100? Like, and that was always
the goal.
And it's like every time I'd get a mark off, I'd be like, okay, what did I do wrong, rather than, oh my gosh,
I did well.
I did right.
So I think here's one thing is at the school I went to, since they did percentages since junior high, my idea of like what an A was so warped. Like an A, I think in reality, the standard for an A is like an 85 to 100. Like that's but in my head, I'm like, no, like a good, I think an A, like technically if you score between like an 85 to 100 is an A.
No way.
but in your head, you would like, especially at the time, I would never have thought that like, that an 85 would have been a good grade, right? Or like an A plus is like above a 90 or something. Like so my perception
like my
during this
perception
time,
A plus is 95.
Yeah.
A is 90.
But that's not at all it. And like average, like this was so warped at my school because a class average in a test would be like sometimes would be an 85 or a 90.
Right.
So like your idea of what doing well already or like doing well in comparison to everyone is already so warped because an average grade, especially during high school, I believe like an average grade is like a 70. That's when you've met expectation. But for me at the time, a 70 was not meeting expectations. At that point, I was like, I didn't know anything on the test.
Yeah.
Which is
I barely made.
Yeah. I'm like, I barely put my name on that test. Like, and so sometimes like, and so I took AP in high school. And so obviously sometimes some tests would come, especially like at the beginning of the AP process, the class would take a test and the class average would be like an 85 or like an 80. And the whole class would be like, oh my God, we did so bad. Oh my, and the teacher who didn't teach at our school, like who hadn't taught at our school for so long would be like, no, an 80 average is a very good average, especially in an AP class. And our whole class was like, we got our butts kicked. Like, what just happened? And then, so like my whole idea was so warped when meeting expectation is like a 65%, a 70%. I'm like, the expectation to me, not to anybody else, was 90 or whatever. And in junior high, I talked a lot more about grades with my friends, but there was definitely kids at that school who were at that school because their parents wanted them to be there, not because they wanted to be there. Like I remember having friends who I was like, in my head, I remember thinking like, you are not happy here. Mm-hmm. You're not thriving in this environment. If anything, this is adding like way more pressure. And like, you're not doing bad in school, but you're in like the standard is so different here that you are unhappy with how you're doing, even though you're not doing bad, because this is just not the environment you want to be. Your focus to go to that school is like maybe not to go to the university, or like you don't need to put this much pressure on yourself.
Yeah.
And because they felt like parental pressure, we would talk about grades. And I think kids in general can be really toxic in junior high. We talk about it in the group, and then like someone would not do as well and they'd be like really sad on themselves. And it definitely like started catty fights in junior high to the point where I learned like, you don't share your grades. I would share my grades with like my close friends to see how we did, but it was friends that I knew would not like take it as an issue because we were kind of performing to the same level. But like people you knew were not doing well, or like not doing, because everyone kind of had an idea, especially like my grad class was so small. We were only 80 people. Everyone kind of knew like what everyone's average grade was. So like you wouldn't really talk about it to kind of like, I mean, like maybe this is probably really fake, but like to feel like less competition.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I definitely like encountered some people in high school who would like lie about their grades.
That was so common. And so I kind of learned and adapted to not share my grades. And I mean, you probably noticed I rarely share my grades now, even in school. Like, I mean, we're not in the same degree. So that also like doesn't like, it will share like a good grade, but like rarely will I be like, this is what I got on the test. Right. I don't tell other people. I will like tell my close friends when I know they won't like take it as anything competitive, but especially with people that I just like know in my degree that I'm not friends with, I'm like, I'm not telling you my grade. Because this is like off topic a little bit, but I remember in my first year, we had like a random quiz in chem, and I did like decently well because I took AP Chem, so I already like knew a lot of the content going in, and this kid didn't take AP Chem. And the school I went to is like quite well known in the city. And so this kid asked me like, oh, like what high school do you go to? And I was like, oh, I went to this high school. And the school is like decently well known in the city. And he's like, oh wow, like that must be really fancy, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, okay. Cause he like went to like the public school near me. And then we did this quiz like in those tutorials, and I got my grade back. He's like, oh, like what did you get? And I was like, oh, like I'm happy with my grade. Like I don't really like sharing my grades. He's like, oh, like why aren't you gonna tell me what you got? Whatever. And I think he like looked that I got something right that he got wrong, and he like snatched the paper out of my hand being like, oh, I did something similar, like why didn't I get a point, blah blah. And I was just like so taken aback because that has never happened to me before, and it felt nasty. I was like, why is this boy doing this to me right now? I'm like, I feel judged for the school because like my school had this like or I guess it maybe still does, had this thing where you would like tell someone like, oh, I went to this school, and they'd be like, oh, like, do you think like you're better than everyone because you went to this school?
Right.
And like, you know me, I don't think that I think that I am that way, to the point where in meeting people in first year of university, I like didn't want them to ask me what school I went to, because I didn't want them to be like, oh, do you like think you're better than everyone because you went to the school? And I'm like, no, I just went there because like that was the only option at the time, to be honest. Like, there wasn't a school near me, and I stayed there, and I ended up like doing well in that environment.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And I remember like, yeah, high school, so much of my identity was like my grades, and I think I put so much of who I was as a person into that. And then when I got into my program, like my grades did get me into that, especially because the dual degree was so small at the time.
Competitive at the time.
So like I'm like, you know, when I put in the work in that, but I remember first day of university, I don't know if you remember, because we were in the same class.
Yeah. But we've known each other for like 5 years now.
So we had linear algebra day one. And
oh my gosh, that class.
And I remember sitting down, I was like sitting down with my you know, tablet. I'm like ready to be there. And we had like the prof, and he like comes in, and I don't know if you remember this, but this stuck with me, okay? And he was like, you guys might have been like your top shit in your high schools, but you're like nothing here. And I was like, oh, okay. Terrified, right? First midterm we have in linear algebra. I remember this so vividly, and I know I remember this stuff because clearly like it impacted me. Yeah. I got an 80 on this test, which like first university course, first midterm in university, like and
linear algebra, which is not something here that you see in high school at all. Like it's like not related at all to the math you see in high school. Yeah.
And I came home and I was bawling my eyes out, and my mom was like, Lavinia, you're in university now. Like, if you react like this to every grade you get, like you're screwed. You're going to drive yourself crazy. Like, you can't kill yourself over these grades. Like through your mental health, and like drive yourself down this hole. Like, that's not gonna get you anywhere. You're in university now. Like, now that you're in university, like get the grades you get and like move on, you know? Yeah. But and I just could not accept that. And that's where at the point, like, yes, like my parents pushed me to do well in school like my whole life, but it got to the point where it was no longer like my parents pushing over, and my parents were telling me to like chill. And it was so like in my head that like, no, I have to, because even though like, yeah, I was like top grades in high school, and yes, I knew that like the smartest of the smartest kids were going into engineering, but it's like now I have to like still like stay on top. Like I can't, you know, like I have to still maintain those grades, because if not, like who am I? And I think a bit of that like stuff through first year, but I ended up doing really well in first year, and I was like, this wasn't as bad as people were telling me. Like I still got like high grades, you know, ended with like a 4.0. I was like, this is like, you know, what are people bringing out? Yeah, like it's fine. Dun dun dun. And then second year came, and that humbled the fuck out of me. And that is when I went through like my full identity crisis of like, who am I apart from these grades? I remember first semester, was it first semester or yeah, I think it was my fluids class. Don't even mention that. And it was a quiz. Like, it was a quiz. It wasn't even like the midterm or anything, but I think I got like a 60 on this test, and I was crushed. And then the next test came. 60, 65, something like that. Yeah. The next test came again. And that's when I was like, okay,
what is happening?
I'm broken, you know? And obviously, like, so when we did our second year, it was like prime COVID, like online school, everything online. Yeah. So like obviously that like impacted things. But in a way, I'm like, what is happening to me? Because like this is not who I am. Yeah. And I think being home all day, I don't know what your days looked like, but for me, it was like wake up, do school all day, sit back down, do homework till night, go to bed, wake up for class. Like, it was literally all I did
was school. There was no life outside school. Yeah, kind of like catching up.
And it wasn't like leaving, like at least like before I'd like go to class, then I'd like take the train home, come home, study, like,
or like at least you'll see your friends during that.
Have a little bit of a cry together about the test, you know, like, you know, but here is literally me in my room at my desk all day long. Like no change of pace, no change of environment, nothing. So it was like so ingrained in that, and for like if anything, it was like, well, I have all this time to like put this effort into school and do this, and I'm
Why am
putting
I
in the
not
time,
doing well?
and why am I
Yeah.
not performing the way, like I literally thought my brain was broken, one, and second, I'm a failure, and I literally felt so lost. Like, what am I supposed to do?
Mhm.
I'm gonna fail out. I'm not gonna get an internship. I'm not like, I
Yeah.
was like spiraling in these moments.
I'm kind of like gonna catch you up to like that point, I guess, is I feel like so much of high school, the end of high school for me was always just like, what program are you gonna get to? What school are you
Yeah.
gonna go to? Like both of my parents are engineers, so I went into engineering not because of that, but I just like knew, and that's what I wanted. I knew it was competitive, and like one of my best friends went into engineering the year before I did, so I knew I needed like the grades, and I did AP Calc, AP Chem, Physics.
Which when you do that, it's like, what other program could you go into?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
especially like,
and then I did AP
that-
English,
yeah.
but that was a fluke in the
Just for
system.
fun.
No, that was more just because like the rumor was at the time that engineering programs were forcing you to do English, and I hated English so much that I was like, there's no way you can convince me to take an English class in university. So I'm gonna like try and get the course like credits for it now, where it will be like objectively easier than doing it.
Yeah.
But like if you look back, the only purpose of doing AP, at least in Canada, is that it'll prepare you for your classes, because it's not going to be easier to get the grades, and universities in Canada don't look at AP if you're from Canada. So the only reason you're doing that to yourself is like you're actually almost holding yourself back to get not as good of grades, just so that like you'll have an easier time in university, which already is like, if
And
you're
not have the shock as much.
16 years old, and I guess like it teaches you how to study a bit more. Like granted, the way I was studying in high school is probably not as like intricate as the way I was studying, but I know a big shock for a lot of students going into university is I don't know how to study for these tests. Like I'm doing bad because I just simply would like read my notes. That's not I think the biggest impact of going to the school I went to was like, it made me think a lot about my future. Like I took a lot of classes and did things on purpose to like get into the school I wanted and like make my life easier in university. But also was like, so that first year is not as much of a shock and you like succeed. So similarly to you, because I'm sure like you went into school knowing how to study and all these things, I like did not feel as much of a shock in first year. I was like, people would be complaining like I'm studying all the time, and I'm like, baby girl, that's what I was doing in high school. In high school I was studying all the time because I wanted to do these grades. I was doing AP. I had all of these activities. Like that's not new to me.
The time, like that's a huge thing, is like my high school too, like I was so booked and like
busy
because like since I was in the cause AP program, I was at school so some days from like 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Like that was just my schedule.
You knew how to dedicate time to
I
school.
knew that. So for me, university was not a change in like how much time I was spending at school, how much time I was dedicating to school. That was not a change. And with the studying too, I remember people coming to me first year of uni and being like, oh my gosh, like you did all the examples, they all made sense to me, but like the test had different questions. I'm like, well, obviously it's about applying your knowledge. And I saw so many people didn't know how to actually apply the knowledge. They would just memorize how to do the questions.
Yeah, and that's not going to get you anywhere, especially in engineering.
I had like a really, really good physics teacher in high school that taught me how to study and how to apply my knowledge. So for me, I was like, this is like already done.
Exactly. Like the school I went to was like a university preparatory school. They would always be like, we're chasing you down for this, but remember in university, they're not going to chase you down to get this done. Like it was always like, that was kind of always the idea. And so let me tell you the shock when this girl from my school dated some guy who went to public high school. Come to find out that he didn't do homework. He would come home from school and like hang out with his friends. I was flabbergasted. I was like, what do you mean he doesn't do homework? I like genuinely like, because like everyone I knew would like whatever did, maybe would hang out with their friends a little bit after school, but then everyone would go home and do homework and go to their after school activities and all of these things. When I like found out that she was like, oh, I'm gonna like go hang out, I was like, what do you mean you don't have time? Like at this time I also danced all the time, so I was like dance school. That was all I did. And then I had like my school activities, but I could not even fathom. So then that whole idea, that shift in first year of like focusing all your time to school, especially in engineering, was not as much of a shift. But second year, so I left first year and I was like, okay, like there's definitely, I remember that first AP or Lin Alg class, and then I remember the final. The final, I believe I got like a 68 because I like got nervous during the test and it like kind of freaked me out. And I literally, at this time I lived in residence, and I like genuinely was like, drowning in my own tears, called my mom, and I was like, this is unacceptable. Like, my mom was like, and for so long in high school, like when after I got into Eng, my mom was like, by the way, like you're going into Eng, it's gonna be hard time. Like Eng is not what high school was like. Don't have these expectations of what you had in high school. It's not gonna be the same. She was like, my first couple of years in engineering, I was getting my butt kicked. Like, have this in mind.
My parents said the same, and they're like, now it's about like getting the class done,
keeping up, and
rather than like
learning rather than doing well. And I was like, I got that 68,
but I'm still gonna have
exactly. But I was like, but I've been getting 95% on everything, so like why would I not be getting 95?
Exactly.
And in a lot of things I did do decently well in first year. So then I got the 68, and I was like end of the world. Like I genuinely was like choking, being like, what am I doing here? Like, it's like how can this be happening to me? And I think at the time, I think at the time I didn't realize how much of my identity I placed into school, because it was just what happened. Like I always, and like in high school, it was like, what school are you going to get into? And I was really privileged. Like, I mean, I know I worked hard, but I was lucky enough that I got into every school I wanted to. So like any form of like rejection that a high school student might feel in regards to university, I didn't feel, because I got into everything I wanted. I was like, and the schools I applied to, I got in. Like, obviously I'm very lucky, but I also can look back and know I worked for that. Like I didn't get that because I was just like naturally smart. I don't deny that I think like I do well in those subjects. I understand them, but I also know I worked for that. I gave up years of being able to dance. I gave up years of like hanging out with my friends after school. So many of these things because I wanted to be able to do that and like have that option.
I think the rejection it feels like rejection in a way, because yes, I was really good at studying and all, but I think it even got to the point where like, because I learned how to study so well and I knew how to strategically take tests, it got to the point where I could just like review like my notes for some like,
and I'd be fine
and I'd do amazing. So then in university, when I was putting in all this effort and like getting those low grades and being like rejected, it felt like no, this can't be. I don't.
That doesn't happen to me.
That doesn't
exactly. A 65 on a test. Like I remember I did bad on one test because I did AP maths, and the way my school was structured, I had to do grade 9 and 10 math in 1 year. And I did bad on one test, and it was so out of pocket that I like spent all of Christmas break studying for it, and then like did the next couple, and like everything worked out perfectly fine. And it would get to the point where it's like I went into studying for a test, and it was like, I'm just reviewing. I already know this. I already understand this. I'm just like reviewing and prepping for a test. And those like standardized tests that you have in high school, what we have our diplomas and our AP exams, I did well in those exams. So then I was like, university, I got this. And that test, I like genuinely literally remember laying in bed. I was like, like break down, because I was like, this doesn't happen to me. And also because I was like, you know what, if I had done bad and I hadn't studied, I understand, but I didn't. I did study,
and just again the mentality of like I don't get these types of grades.
Or like, even if I ever felt like I wasn't 100% prepared for a quiz, I would still like pull through with decent grades.
Exactly. Yeah. It would just like, I'd figure it out during the test. Almost like I'd always figure it out during the test. I'd always figure it out.
And then second year happened. Done. I was taking 7 and 6 classes, and I had gotten into like the program I wanted. So at our school, we do like a general first year of Eng, and I got into my program, biomedical and mechanical engineering. I'm doing a minor in biomedical engineering, the way I phrase that. And I was like, and at this time, like the biomedical program was like notorious for like being really hard to get into. And then with the end of first year being during COVID, they like kind of made it a little bit easier. But I was like, in my head, I was like, I still would have gotten in like regardless of if they had made it easier. So like I like succeeded in my goal essentially. And then I took those 7 classes. And at this time, it was COVID, like peak of COVID, like you should not be leaving your house at all.
All of our school was online.
Online, like everything was online. And my grandparents were living with me at the time. So I had like an extra reason to not leave my house, because I didn't want to get my grandparents sick. And I remember my friends had like all like moved in together. And they were all in Eng, and they would all do school together. And a big thing that happened at this time during COVID was that like the teachers really cared about you not cheating, obviously, but you're online. A lot of people were like living with their friends, were living in residence or whatever, and so then they would cheat. And so I think then teachers got the idea of like, students are going to be cheating, so I'm going to make this test way harder so that they don't, and if they are cheating, they're still going to have a hard time. But then riddle me this, I'm at home by myself. most of my friends are not even in my program. Most of my friends went into like another program. And I'm not cheating because I don't want to cheat, because I literally never cheated. And I'm not saying this to be like, I never cheat. Like, I genuinely never cheat in high school, because my idea was like, that's just cheating myself.
I felt the same, and I was like, I'm gonna have to learn this at one point or another. And I just felt like, honestly,
and like the fear. I have a big fear of authority, so then I was
too.
just like, I can't.
And for me, even like this is the first, my spring course was the first time I've ever used any sort of AI for school. Can you believe that?
Yeah, I can, because I've never used it either.
I could
Only to
not
write
touch
emails.
it. I couldn't touch it. I was like, I can't. And I was like,
They're gonna send me to prison
I
if
was like,
I
wait
use
a
it.
damn minute, I can use it for a research paper.
Yeah.
Like to like
Even to get you
ideas.
sources
I
and like
can
point
do
you in a
that. There's
direction.
no like they even encouraged it.
Yeah.
Like it's fine. But no, I get what you mean in that. And it was like I need to like figure this out and like
Exactly. So my idea was like, at this point, it's also, it felt really weird at the time, because it's like, oh, I made some of these friends in first year, and now they're all like doing their own thing, and like we haven't talked through the summer, so it feels really weird to reach out to you to like do school together. And the friends that I did talk to were not in my program, like we're not in mechanical.
Yeah.
And so I was doing all of the school alone, and I have never felt more discouraged in my life, because I was studying what felt like more than I had ever been studying in my life before. And I would not, like, I was not reaping the benefits, because it was the first time that I went into studying for a test, and it wasn't like, oh, I'm just going to review this. I was like, I have no idea what's happening in class. Because I was having such a hard time even focusing in class, because like you're getting up at 8, like 7:30, you start school at 8, then you have these like
6.
out till 6, and then you have to continue doing school and at the same day. And then also teachers or profs at the time are giving you like more work, because they would use courses as just like at like your lecture time as like a question period. So then you'd have to like find time within your classes to do school. And my mind at this time, like genuinely only like 8 a.m. till 2 a.m. I was doing school. There was no doubt about it. Like there was nothing else that was happening. And then also these teachers were having this expectation of people are cheating, so I'm going to make the test so much harder, so that even if they are cheating, they're not going to do well. But I'm doing this by myself. So it felt like I can study whatever I want on the test, and I know profs are going to put something I have no idea on this test. And I don't think I realized how overwhelmed I was with school until Halloween, which like that's not even that much into the semester. I was like hanging out with my friends, because my mom was like, go out, have like fun, hung out with my friends at like someone's house. And I got a little bit tipsy and started crying about school. And that was like, I was just so genuinely distraught over the fact that I was putting so much work in. I had never felt like I was putting so much work into school, and I was not reaping any benefits at all. And then I was also hearing from my friends who were doing school together, who I couldn't study with because I didn't want to risk my grandparents and getting them sick, being like, oh, I did well at this. And I'm like, yeah, because you're doing it together. Like you're not doing well because you understand, it's because you're like doing it together and going online. And I was so scared of ever getting in trouble, and I was putting so much work in, and I was like, I am not doing like these are it was maybe an entitlement. I was like, these are not the grades I deserve. I'm putting so much more work into this. And I would understand it, but also just the time pressure, being in your room doing a test. Sometimes I'd start tests at 1 a.m. because like you just did not have time. You'd have so many things to do. Like those are all not ways to succeed. And I was having such an identity crisis. I didn't know, I don't think I even really recognized at the time that I was having such a hard time with myself, because I didn't recognize that I was like shamed of myself because I was doing bad in school. But I remember like I would hand in a paper, and like it was such a time crunch, because I felt like I had 1,000,001 deadlines at the time. They were like, read this and do this and go to this question period and have this assignment and you have this quiz. I didn't have time to do anything. And I remember I'd hand in assignments and then like have a panic attack, being like, that was not my best work. I just like finished that. I had to just get it done. Like I didn't do this to the best of my capability, and I'm not proud of this. And I would just have a mental breakdown. My mom was like, why are you crying? Like there's no reason to be crying. I was genuinely so upset over everything I did in school. And it got to a point where like my anxiety was so bad. I remember in high school sometimes getting freaked out over a test and like having anxiety and maybe like crying before a test, but crying after submitting an assignment to the point where I like couldn't breathe and was having a panic attack. And my mom turns to me being like, this is not okay. Having your mom go, I don't know how to help you anymore. You need to find help, because I don't know what's wrong, Nicole, but you need to find help. because something is wrong. I was having such a hard time socially. I wasn't seeing anybody of my friends, and I am a social person. I was having like a hard time with one of my best friends at the time that like I was like that friendship was getting lost. I was just having such like a hard time with everything. I genuinely look back and that was like a point like that I was like so I don't even think I recognized at the time that I was having such a hard time like mentally and like it was in such a dark place. I was so like ashamed of myself and I would work really hard and I would get so down being like you could have done better because you're not getting the grade that you should be getting. So you obviously didn't work hard enough, even though I genuinely couldn't put more time in. If I put more time in, I probably would have driven myself more crazy than I did.
Yeah.
And then I went to therapy. And that's when my therapist was like, I think that you have a hard time. You're having a hard time because you have identified your whole life. You've heard like, you're good at school, good job. You're good at school, good job. You're really good at school, good job. And you're still hearing good job, but you are not good at that one thing that people always said you were good. Yeah. And I saw my whole worth. I didn't recognize this at the time, but I know now. At the time, I was like, my only value as like a friend, as a student, as a child is that I'm working hard and I'm getting good grades and I'm making my parents proud. But then after a lot of therapy, I came to realize that like my parents don't love me because I'm a good student. You know what I mean? Like my parents' relationship with me is not the way that it is because I was getting a 95 in my test in high school. My friends aren't friends with me because I'm getting a 95 in high school. You know what I mean? So then I came to realize that I was like, this is my whole personality. Like I'm not a good person because I'm good at school. And that's when things changed. But I had such a hard time with that at first. Mm-hmm. And I was in such a dark place. Like I like can probably say that I like had some form of depression at the time and like quite genuinely like hated myself because I was not doing what I thought was like always expected of me. Right. And that expectation at that point wasn't placed on me from anyone except for myself because that was what I had done for so long.
Yeah, and then once it's and I think it's such a good point of saying like because it's what you've been told for so long of like you got a 95, good job. You got a 100, good job, good job, good job, good job. So then it's like you start validating yourself in that, you know, and patting yourself on the back. And every time you see a new grade come out, you're like, you know,
I did it, yeah.
So then when you don't, it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like it feels like something's broken, like seriously broken. It feels like something's wrong with you.
And it's a change that happens so quickly. It went from that year being like a little bit hard, but like to what is happening
and like
what am I doing wrong? What
am I doing wrong?
What is the problem with me?
And not just like one test and then I just bounced back. That was just a bad week. No, like it's continuous. And I felt so like that's it. Like I've lost all my strategic studying. I've lost all my strategic test taking. Like who am I if I'm not my grades?
Exactly.
That's literally how I felt. Who am I if I'm not my grades? And it really like for me, it took I would say probably until I really had to take a moment back with myself and be like, okay, but what else have I done other than just like grades? Like I'm in this program, you know, I got into my discipline. I'm trying to like do a whole like hobby on the side. Like I was like, that's when I kind of was getting into like TikTok around that time. So I was like doing all that. It's like I'm, you know, I'm working on this stuff. Like that's pretty cool that I'm like doing this. And even just like other accomplishments, like growing up and all that, like I'm like, it's not just all about this, like maybe this class I just like don't vibe with as much, you know, or that. And there was so much fear in me that like, okay, because I'm not getting these grades, like I'm not going to get an internship. Like I'm, you know, this is over. And then I think in third year when I did get that, it gave me like a bit more of that boost of confidence and being like, okay, like this is okay.
Yeah.
But I think even in that, there was like some competitive nature in like terms of like, you know, I think like I got my internship like really early, so I think that like gave me that reassurance of like, okay, like I'm good, like I'm kind of getting back into like me again. And I remember my interview for my internship really kind of changed my perspective because I wrote in my resume like all the courses like I've done and this and this, my GPA, everything, and I was really conflicted if I should like put in there that I had been doing YouTube and all of that.
Yeah.
In my resume because all I had was like retail like experience. I worked at like Banana Republic for 4 years and I was like, you know what, I'll just put it in there because I don't really have any other like job experience, but I've had like I was working with this company and filming YouTube videos for them at the time, so I'm like, I think I should put that in there. Like I think it's valid to put. And it's crazy because I had my job interview and like the number one question that they were asking me about is like, so tell us about like your YouTube and the stuff you've done on social media. And I was like, what? Like,
interesting.
I was like, why do you want to know? Like, you know, and I was like, I realized in that moment, like, it's because these people aren't hiring me just because, like, yeah, obviously grades are part of it, but they're not looking back like my high school grades. They're looking at this one course specifically and
they're not like, oh, you know what? Her final like grade 10, that's what I want, you know?
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it was like, who are you as a person? What have you done as a, like, all in all? Obviously, like, grades were a part of that, but they weren't everything, and they weren't, like, I didn't have my transcript, like, stapled onto my forehead, like, this is who I am.
And I think especially going into Eng, because you meet so many brilliant, I think, people in Eng. I think another thing is you in high school, or all the kids who go into Eng are typically the top kids in their high school, and then you're like, oh, I'm not the top here anymore.
No,
you see a lot of kids who are really smart, but that doesn't necessarily mean they'll thrive because a lot more other things come into doing well. For me, what changed was a lot of therapy, to be completely honest, like having a wake up call where I was struggling so much mentally, like everyone in my time knew it. My like boyfriend at the time knew it. My friends were like, there's something wrong. Having your mom say, I can't help you. Like my mom has always really been there for me when I'm having like, sometimes I get really down and stuff. And her being like, you need help because there's like, I'm having panic attacks like on a weekly basis, having anxiety attacks. I was so down on myself, like had such bad self-image issues that she was like, you need to go therapy. Went to therapy after a lot of sessions and a lot of self-reflection. I was able to finally able to change that perspective, because one of the things I even struggle with is just change in general. I was like, is it even okay for me to not to be struggling with school and not be doing well? And a really big thing in my identity that I didn't recognize at the time is I was so proud of having that success and doing so well in school and being so much younger than everyone else. I was always like, yeah, I'm one of the top in my school and I'm younger than everyone else. Oh, I'm going to do my degree in 4 years and an internship and graduate younger than most people even graduate university. Like that was kind of like a flex in my head. I was like, oh, if I do a master's program, I'll be younger than everyone else.
And once you kind of put that in your mind, it's just like, and I think I didn't have like that exact thing, but in my head I was like, oh, like, you know, I'm gonna do like these 2 degrees and work this job. And, like I was like, I'm gonna do this because that's what I set out to do.
Exactly.
And so once you set it out, you're like,
how could I not? So then throughout my beginning of my year, I was like, I'm finishing this degree in 4 years. If I do an internship, 5. And then my mom saw how much I was struggling also, because with the minor, you have to take more courses. And that's what really struggled. I was like, I can't dedicate the time I want to these courses because I have so many things to do. And in university, and especially in Eng, you go into studying for a test and you don't know what's you have to teach yourself first and then you study. And my mom was like, take less classes. And I was like, why would I, I can't, that's not an option. I was like, why would you even bring that up? That's not an option. I'm supposed to graduate at 22 and I'm going to have blah, 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 blah. A lot of self-reflection later. And I was like, and I took 5 classes in my first semester of 3rd year, but I still was like, I can do better. Because I was like, I need a social life. I know some people don't feel the need, but I was like, I need to be able to hang out with my friends and not study. I need to have that kind of outlet. I don't have dance anymore as an outlet. I need to have some form of outlet.
No, I need to
I also need to be able to go to the gym and take care of my health, and those are important things as well.
I needed to do something
that I wasn't doing
with friends at least once a week. Every weekend I'd try to plan something.
Yeah.
Even for sure, because I was like, there's no way that I can just and I think that's what affected me so much in 2nd year, when I was just because at least you know, in 1st year. Yeah, I was school to school, but then I was I had that glimpse of something fun with my friends on the weekend, you know, and it was I'd work each week for that really
reward,
fun thing on the weekend. Whereas in 2nd year, I didn't have that anymore. But yeah, it's interesting when you kind of place those standards on yourself and kind of having to let go of them and feeling it's okay to change, and it's okay to have a change of plan, and it's not the end of the world, you know. And looking back years in the future, what's one more year?
And
at the expense of
yourself, yourself,
your sanity.
Now that I am in a much after I did 5 courses 3rd year, I was like, okay, I'm actually gonna take less, took 4. And then I was like, you know what, maybe I'll end up taking an extra year. And that obviously at the time was how does this affect internship? How does that affect capstone? Was able to figure out. My mom was like, you're gonna figure it out, it's fine. And looking back now I'm in such a better place mentally that I think the hardest thing, I mean, everyone says this, your worst critic is yourself.
Totally.
But there is I think there's not a greater heartbreak than disappointing yourself. Having these expectations for yourself and then looking and being like, I have not done what I have set my mind to do. You know what I mean?
Not only that, but I think also like disappointing, like in a way, your like childhood self, because like the person that put those expectations on you of like graduating early, like that was like you in high school, like you're like 15, 16-year-old self.
Yeah.
So it's like,
and also
15, 16-year-old self didn't know exactly what university would look like and how would that have to change, but you now in your 20s are like, no, I have to do this because like that's what I set out for myself to do.
And like, I don't talk about it often, but I was like in such a dark place that I was almost disappointed in myself that I like couldn't like succeed under that pressure, or what I felt like I couldn't succeed under pressure. Looking back, we got an internship, we had your summer experience, everything worked out like perfectly fine. But at the time, I was letting down all of these expectations I had for myself. And I was also in such a dark place, something I'd never experienced before, that I really struggled with that. Just, I didn't feel like myself. And like, I can say now that that year especially completely shaped me. I changed so much second year. That year, second year, and like the month where I was in therapy, like consistently, I like look back and I'm like, I was a completely different person first year of university to third year of university, when like, especially when we started becoming friends, because I went through so many changes. I mean, everyone had a hard time that year, obviously. So many people like lost family, all of these terrible things. But I look back and I'm like, that's when I've changed the most, because
you were forced into change.
I was forced.
Everyone was forced into new. Like it was such a big change for everyone, not only because we were going through like I would say, and what other people have said to that, like the hardest year of university is second year. Like I've been told that by my parents even, but I think on top of that, we were also going through so much change like globally that like everyone
and also at that age you change a lot. There is no denying it. 18, 19, you're changing a ton.
And when you're forced into change, like all you have, either you're gonna sit with it and like be in this miserable place and like feel really uncomfortable, or you're just gonna like change with the change and like accept the new flow and like.
Well, I was in a place where I was like, my life is completely changing. Like I went into that second year in a relationship, being best friends with this girl that I'd been friends with since like 5th grade. And I came out of that year not being friends with that person anymore. That relationship felt super insecure. I had never felt worse in my entire life. I was like, I'm doing bad in school. I need to go into therapy. And like, I was like very socially like I've never looked down at therapy, but I never thought that I would have needed to go to therapy. And like, especially in an immigrant family, that's kind of like a crazy thing to do even. And then I went through a lot of intense therapy during that summer between second and third year and the beginning of third year, when then I took 5 classes and then I was like, well, I actually signed up for 6, then took 5. And then I was like, and the next year, you know what? I'll take 4. It's not going to change. I'd finally been able to accept. So going from all of those changes in 16 months, I came out of, and my friend group changed entirely in third year. We became like properly friends in third year, stopped being friends with a ton of people from first year. I felt like a completely different person. And at the time it was for the better, but when things started to get like, now I can look back and that's for the better, and I know I grew a lot.
At that time it's so uncomfortable.
But at the time it was so uncomfortable.
Third year was my like huge year of change.
For me, third year was like, that's the year that kind of like, I look back at third year and I'm like, I've changed since third year, obviously, like I've gotten older. That was like the pivot. But that felt like the year I was like, things have changed. Like I've become like clarity.
And I think like that's just part of like growing up, honestly. Like as you said, like with the age. I also think like we were getting like slowly back into in-person school things, like and here's a new perspective on like how I study, friends.
Internship also was a really big thing. Like internship was coming up, and for a really long time I struggled with the idea of like, who am I outside of being a student? Like when I graduate, who am I outside of being a student? A big reason I was interested in post-secondary, or like not even post-secondary, but like going into grad school at the beginning of my degree, was because like, what is my life not being a student? And then I went into a job full time and I was like, oh, wait, this is okay. Like all of these things are okay. And that's kind of when everything got better. But like, to be frank, it was a lot of therapy, a lot of self-reflection that was like, change is okay. Change is uncomfortable, but it's going to make you grow for the better. And like, I am so much happier. I have found ways to deal with like bad grades and know that's not part of my identity, know that's not what's gonna shape me to be like a good engineer or a good employee.
You kind of have to shake it off
exactly
and like move on to the next.
And even I'm proud looking back. I remember I did an interview for one internship, and this was like a smaller startup company. This guy asked me, he was looking at my grades, and objectively, not a lot of interviewers ask you about your grades when you're looking for an internship.
Which that was a big turning point where I was like, oh,
it's not that important. It's more like your experience and how you deal with issues. And one test especially is like not going to shape. Oh, and third year, especially since we were back in person, I was like, oh, I didn't do well on this test. And then I was like, oh, guess what?
No,
85% of the class didn't do well on the test. The kids on Zoom who were like, the test was easy, is the one kid getting an A in the class. The class average is actually worse than what I'm doing. Yeah. So everything's fine. Yeah. That helped me a lot.
Same.
I had a guy ask me, he was like, I'm looking at your grades and like objectively we can recognize you do really well in some courses and really bad in other courses. I was taken aback.
Good.
And I was like, okay.
Stop.
I was like, oh. And the way I handled it, and he was like, why is that? And I was like, the way I handled it, I was like, frankly, the grades you see there are, you know that not everyone's going to be perfect at doing every single course in engineering. A lot of those grades were a time during COVID where we know that education like flopped. I didn't say that during an interview, but I was like, the quality of education decreased significantly. Tests were much harder. Mm-hmm. And you were not getting the same regular learning experience. The way I answered the question was fine because I ended up getting a job offer from them for a lot of other reasons. I did not take the job, but
so that's a good learning
moment. Yeah.
Of like, okay, like it's more about what did you take like out of those courses than like the physical.
I got a whatever.
Like obviously, I think it's all, and this is everything in life. It's all about balance. Like yes, grades are important to an extent, but when they're to the point where it's driving your full identity, you know, you're having mental breakdowns about it every day. You are just like, you are thrown into a spiral if one bad grade goes down for something that's like so minuscule. That's when it's like, this is an issue. Yeah. And obviously on the other end of it too, like if you don't give a shit at all, like you're going to be weeded out, like you're not going to make it through the program. So it's like, it's all about a balance. And I think after third year, after going on internships, seeing how much like the minute you leave university, after you have that degree in hand, no one will ever ask you about a grade again in your life. It's more about like, what are you doing now?
What have you taken away from your degree?
I learned so much in my internship that people appreciated me and my work for the way I could talk, for the way I could speak, for the way my work ethic, my productivity, like all of that, rather than like, how did you do on this exam? You know, it was more like the learning mindset and like how I could problem solve. And then during internship, like I obviously like was growing a lot in like my now full-time job with like content creation. So I think that gave me a really good perspective of like, okay, like what have I been able to grow actually like fully outside of school, like completely unrelated to my grades, but taking things that I've learned in school and applying them to like my work ethic outside of it, you know? And then when I came back in fourth year after internship, I came into it with such a different perspective where not only was obviously like I was studying, I was putting in the work as I've always done, but like a bad grade I'd get was such a like more like I would just brush off because I'm like, okay, on to the next. And like I put the effort in, but I realized so many of these classes where it just like no matter what you do, no matter how you study, like that's the grade you're gonna get, and the whole class kind of did that way. And you just have to move on with it. And also
just accepting in your later point of your degree that it's like these classes, especially in our programs, are shaped so that 75% of the class does like really bad. Yeah. Like your average, like the average is really actually a C, and your C is a 55%.
No, I remember in third year getting a 30% on a test, and I was like, what?
Oh my god. Yeah, I had a test with like a 16% average, and I was like, and then I was like, oh wait. Everybody did this bad. It's totally okay.
Exactly.
And then taking less course, or for me, sorry, I totally interrupted you. For me, taking less courses, because I think a big thing that bothered me, I was like, I'm not learning what I want to learn, and I feel like I'm just like playing catch up all the time, and I can't do this. Taking less courses like allowed me to actually feel like I was learning things, and even if I still wasn't doing, you know, a 95, because like that's ridiculous in engineering. You're not gonna do that. Rarely are you going to do that in Eng. I was like, I'm understanding. And that's what makes me happy because I know that's what I want to get out of this degree.
More fulfilling for you than just like a check mark with a grade beside it along the way. And for me, I started prioritizing so much more like my health, my sleep. Like And you know, in fourth year, I like set a rule with myself, whereas like I'm going to bed at 9:30, regardless of the test I have, like, cause I had to wake up early. My classes were really early in fourth year. My commute's really long. So I was like, I have recognized that over these past few years, I was prioritizing my grades so much over my sleep, over physical activity, over eating, like everything. Grades were everything, and now it's like something flipped in my mind where I'm like, if I'm not taking care of my body and my sleep and my health and all of this, like I'm not going to be able to have the energy and the fuel to achieve these grades and study for school the way like I would like. So like what's more valuable to me at this time? Like obviously there were still nights where I had to stay up late because like we had a final exam or something, but the thing I had to set more boundaries with is like I can't be doing that on a daily basis when it's like lectures and assignments. Like if it's during final season, that's one thing, you're stretching it out and then you get your rest. But it was like on a daily basis, what's more important to me? Like what's more valuable? Me getting like my full 8 hours of sleep and feeling energized the next day to like write a test well, or staying up super late. You know what I mean? Like,
well, it's also, I think, something you learn as you get older, like maybe in our degrees, we've learned this over time, I don't know. But it's also kind of like understanding, like, where do I need to place my time and energy?
Yeah.
So, you know, like, obviously during finals, you're going to grind, you're going to have to pull an all-nighter if that's what needs to be, but it's finals. It's like, this is like, it's like high reward, high risk, the stakes are high, or whatever, end of capstone, if like, those things. Versus it's like, this is a quiz that's worth 2% of my grade, or a lab that's worth 2%. There's no reason, unless I'm like suffering in the rest of the class and like I need to like make the 3% is like really important, then I need to be pulling an all-nighter for a lab. You know what I mean?
It's like get your sleep.
And at the end of the day, like the most, or at least for me, I'm like, my degree's not gonna matter if I've wound up myself in a hospital bed or like at one point what felt like it could have been like literally a psych ward because of school. Like that is, my degree's not gonna matter if I'm ill or if I like genuinely like driven myself crazy or anxiety because of a degree.
And I know we've both like talked to each other about like the issues with like hormonal balance and stuff. Like stress is like number one. Number one.
Oh, we could do an entire episode about that.
Not only in hormones, but like literal health. Like so many diseases and stuff come out of stress.
Chronic stress.
So it's like, what are you really have to like sit and think, what is my priority here? And how is this gonna play out like in the future? What's gonna matter in like 5 years from now that I'm dealing with all these health effects from the chronic stress, or that 2% lab, as you mentioned, like that I stayed up all night, like stress, you know, like you have to put that into perspective. So with all of that being said, as we close this off, like where are you now in terms of like grades, and like how much value do you put on academics and related to like your self-worth?
I don't think I know I don't place as much value in grades. I think more than anything, especially this last year, I went into my fourth year, or I guess this last year, whatever you want to call it, after internship. And I kind of realized, I was like, I miss school. And that's something I had not felt in a really long time, because I disliked school for so long after those like really rough couple of years.
You probably got recharged.
And for me, my internship was kind of a break where I know you definitely felt different at this time. Is I was like, I'm excited to go back because like I miss learning. I'm like kind of ready to wrap this degree up. I'm ready to get back into the classroom, and I kind of like found my spark of why I even went into engineering in the first place.
I totally get you.
For so long, I was like, I know I in theory like this degree, but I hate everything about this right now. And I finally kind of like got that spark back. We went into it, and I went into it with like friends and a different social life and a different expectation, where I was like, I'm gonna like put all this work in, but I'm also like gonna reward myself for needed classes. Where I had a class in my first semester, fourth year, where I felt so good about the class. I loved going to that class every day. It made me so happy. I like grinded for a test, like, and I was like, oh, I'm understanding things. I didn't do as well as I wanted to on the test, but I look back now and I'm like, I'm proud of myself because I understood and I learned and I enjoyed that class. So do I think grades still matter? I'm always going to try to do as best as I can. Like I think that should be your effort with everything. I think you should always put the best effort forward with anything, even if you're not getting a grade back. But I know now that a grade is not defining my success, because I know in terms of a job or anything, there's so many other factors on the line. Like I still overall want to do well, obviously, like,
but not like drive yourself
but there is
crazy.
no point. And there's obviously, like, I know there's gonna be times of stress because there's times of stress with everything. Like I think it's a balance. You're never not gonna feel like you should feel stress some points in your life. Stress is a normal thing.
And as we mentioned, like during like an exam season, right, like finals, it's like I feel stressed right now, and that's like it makes sense.
Yeah.
But if you have that like same intensity of stress week in and
all
week
the
out,
time,
like,
no, you're gonna make yourself sick. Like,
so that's
actually,
like if it comes in ebbs and flows, like sure, like during midterm season, finals, like a huge report due, like obviously there's gonna be.
And I think that's the thing engineering also teaches you is how to deal with those high periods of stress times, but
not like every week.
But not every week has to be that way. So do I still want to do as best as I can? Yes. But as long as I know I did like as best as I can, and like whatever, I passed the class. But I don't need to pass the class. If 1%, I'm like, I did what I needed to do, to pass the class. I'm happy if I've like learned what I wanted to learn. And there's like other rewards. And I think putting less emphasis on the grades has allowed me to then focus better on like, enjoying the actual course. And I think when I enjoy it, I tend to do better.
And the like university experience as a whole.
Exactly.
Because it flies by so fast. And I think like also too, one thing like I really learned this year is because like I've never taken as many courses as I did this year.
You were I was taking the least courses I've ever taken. I was taking 4 classes and I'm like, woo! And you were not doing that. But I knew this is what I want to do to like, finish. But I went into it, I'm like, okay, I'm taking 16 courses this year. That's crazy. Like I don't even know. Like if you told me when I did 13, I thought I was maybe there is a summer. Second year, I think I did take like 15 courses in a full year, but so if you told me like this September coming up, I'd be doing that again. Like I know I've done it, but like I would not. I know I could do it again, but at this point I'm just like, fuck school. Like I can't anymore. Like I'm just so at my like limit. I think it's just because like now I'm just like ready to like dive into my career and like like I'm kind of like over the like student mentality. But going into that, knowing like I have all these classes, I knew, okay, now that I'm taking all these classes, there is no way for me to give 100% to every single course. There's no way. That's not physically possible. But I could make my new 100% a 90% or an 80%. Like I can, lower that and like spread that energy out more equally. And yes, there were classes where I still did like better and I was like, oh, that's nice. But it wasn't like defining, And then the classes that I did like average in, I was like, okay, that's exactly what I was. You redefine your expectations, which so did I. It was like, because the expectations I had before were unrealistic to the circumstances that I would be in now. And reprioritizing, like, okay, what's really important here? Like, my health is like what's like should be number one in my mind. And so many of us like switch that in our brains where we're like work, school. But then it's like when you get sick or like you literally can't do anything anyway. So it's like, why did you, like, why did you do that in the first place? So it's like having that balance, I think, is so crucial. And now, like, it's so funny. Like, I look back and the things that I was like killing myself over for these grades, and now it's just like it is kind of what it is. And I almost think now that I have that disconnect, I'm almost, I don't want to say like getting better grades for like less effort because I'm still putting in the effort, but because I kind of removed a bit of that pressure, now like when I do get a good grade, it's like, oh, cool, Yeah. But it's not like, thank God, or else like what was I gonna do? Yeah. No, I think for me, removing that pressure away brought me back to why I even liked school in the first place. Because I genuinely really liked school. And there got to a point where I despised it so much. Taking that pressure away is what really, really helped me get back into like, oh, I actually do enjoy. Why did I do this degree in the first place? Or even like capstone. I went into capstone with just like, we're going to do as best as we can because like I want to get a good grade and like do a good project. And then obviously like reaped those rewards, and it was completely unexpected. I think capstone would have been a completely different experience had I from the get-go been like, I'm going to get whatever. Yeah. Or like I expect to do number one in this thing and like made it a whole competition. Exactly. And then had I not met that, I think I would have been so disappointed. I don't think there's a point in my life right now where I would have gone into capstone thinking I need to be number one or whatever. No, I fully agree with that. Like I literally even remember the day of the capstone fair. Like I
was so like checked out of like the whole like awards.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until they were
I was just like here because I have to be, and I was nervous about like the public
Exactly.
speaking part, not because like we need to get, if
I
anything,
didn't even think about the placement
Mhm.
until like it was like, okay, the awards
until
are
people
gonna be
started
up high.
talking to me
Yes.
about it, until people were like, I think you're gonna, and I was like,
Wait,
wait, that's not what I went into it. Like this
Yeah.
is, I didn't put this much effort into this project because I wanted to receive this
Yeah.
form of recognition. I put it in because like I wanted to obviously like impress the
Yeah.
sponsor, all of these things, but I also like wanted to make myself proud and
Yeah.
like was proud of that project.
Yeah,
And
totally.
it brought back, don't get me wrong, definitely there were times where I
Oh,
had a lot of stress if we weren't meeting
yeah.
because like if you're working with a company, there's like money on the line, there's a lot of things on the
And
line.
just like the group work aspect of it, like there's a lot of pressure to it. But I think you just have to take like kind
But
of
it
step
was-
out of it and be like, okay, at the end of the day, this is still a school
I'm
project.
not gonna die because of
like
whatever.
it's just a school project, and kind of like minimize things in your head and like not take it so seriously.
Yeah.
That's literally what you have to do.
Mhm.
And like, yes, you care about this thing, but like at the end of the day,
Mhm.
it's just a university course
Yeah.
that I literally will not be thinking about a year from now.
Exactly. Like, yeah, I know. I mean, my parents say this to me all the time, and I sometimes still have a hard time conceptualizing, but it's like, no, nothing doesn't have a solution except for like death and maybe some illnesses.
Yeah.
And there is no reason why I need to be like driving myself insane.
And you know what? Like,
To-
worst case scenario, worst absolute case scenario,
You have to take capstone
fail a
again.
class and you redo it.
Retake it. Oh,
Like,
been there. I mean, I never failed a class, but I didn't like receive the grade I needed to take or what to like clear the course.
yeah.
Like I passed the class, but I didn't receive the grade because of prerequisites or whatever. Took the course again, and especially because it was the second year, I was like, "This is the end of the world." Come to find out, like over 50% kids in engineering have to do that. So no, it's not. My parents had to do that. Like
it's fine.
People that you deem successful also go
Yeah.
through failure, and I think. I mean, this is maybe very cheesy, but I think it's how you learn to overcome those failures is what stands out to people, and your resilience to those struggles.
You know, you get hit down, and it's
Mhm.
like get back up and start
Yeah.
again, and rather than like having all this fear of like really write down like, and if this is what helps you, like write down like what is the absolute worst case scenario
Yeah.
here. You retake the freaking course,
Mhm.
or you know the program's not for you. Try something, you know, like you'll find
Yeah.
something that like everything I think happens so much for a reason. So it's like we put ourselves in these situations and the stressful times.
And especially at our age, the stakes are so low.
Yeah.
You have so much life left to live.
Yeah.
I mean, even the expectation that we should have known what we wanted to do for the rest of our life at 17 is already kind of ridiculous.
It's so much. And I think like everything happens and I mean like I won't give details here, but like the opportunity I told you like about that I'm doing at the end of the month, it's crazy because I applied to a job when I was like 16, 17 for this company. Didn't get it, and I felt like
the end of the
I was like,
world,
oh my gosh, like I've been, you know, like it was like a huge rejection. But it's like now I'm getting to like work with them in such a different light. So it's like everything comes full circle at one point or another. And like if something's not working for you, like try to see it for a certain reason and like what learning opportunity. And if you hadn't gone through that struggle, and if I hadn't gone through that struggle with having that huge identity crisis, like we wouldn't have the insights and the mindsets that we have now that have strengthened us so much more to get through the rest of our degrees.
Yeah.
And even like just give ourselves more credit and like build up our self-worth and our validation ourselves as people aside from the grades.
Yeah.
Which like if we didn't go through those hard times, like we'd probably still be in that like deep dark hole of like grades.
Or I would be going through that identity crisis now. And I think it would have been way harder to deal with now at 22, 23 than it would have been at 19.
Yeah.
Frankly, I look back though, and I think that maybe if I might like now Nicole would go back and say that to 18 you're Nicole, I don't necessarily know if I would have listened. I think I would have. You just have to unfortunately you have to like I think those are some of the things you have to learn the hard way. And maybe those changes also come with maturity. Like again, you change so much in those years of your life. Well,
you said like your mom told you going into university, your parents sat you down like Nicole, university is gonna be different. Like it doesn't really you don't need that. And what did you say?
In through one out the other.
So you have to just go through it yourself. I think that's a good note to end off this episode. I think a lot of people struggle with like academic validation and kind of placing all their value there, but I think you just have to like if you are in that place, I think it's interesting because if I told like younger me that like I'm like going through assignments kind of like giggling through them in a way now, she'd be like, "What?
I don't think that she would believe you.
No,
I don't
she's
think
like, you're not taking any of this seriously, like, but I think you just have to like go through it and then come out of it realizing like what is actually a priority.
And we can make a whole other episode about that if we wanted to, if it comes to stress and health, because I think we have quite, similar ideas on that as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Nicole, for.
Oh, I had a lot of fun. I was really nervous, but I got to a lot.
Now?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, probably maybe your co-host.
Well, if you guys enjoyed this episode, make sure you give it a thumbs up. If you're watching on YouTube, we post every single Sunday at 7 a.m. MST. We do the video version on YouTube and then audio on Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, all your streaming platforms. But that is it for this episode. Thank you for getting loud with me, and you'll hear from me in the next episode of Loud Talk with Lavi. Bye, everyone.
Bye.